Hello, and welcome to Mapping the College Audition, a podcast where we explore the landscape of the college theater world and try to demystify this daunting audition process. I'm your host, Charlie Murphy, director of MTCA, that's Musical Theater College Auditions, and today we have got a blue-purple tartan kind of show lined up for you. McElroy from the University of Michigan is on the show today. Micheal has been kind enough to teach master classes for MTCA for the past few years and is also a real-life friend of Leo, our other director. Leo and I always remark how odd it is to be the age of some of these faculty members. It truly feels like only yesterday, and certainly when I started doing this, like we were basically the age of our students. We were just slightly older, cool mentors, and now we're like contemporaries with a lot of these program heads, and that is just crazy how time flies. It's like when all of our parents tell me like, oh, you'll blink and Solvi will be 17. I'm like, I don't believe you, and yet I know what you're saying is true. Things are good over here. We just completed a really successful New York City Unifieds. At MTCA, we run a green room a few blocks away from all the action near Pearl and Ripley, so we're a couple blocks away. But we got to hang out with a lot of the students and parents between auditions, and it was just so great, as it always is, to hear all the fantastic stories, try to navigate the ups and downs of the auditions with our students. And there was even a few Solvi sightings in the green room, which was super fun. And the big takeaway from the weekend is it really and truly felt like we were back after a crazy year last year of mixed in-person and online unifieds. You could really feel the excitement of like uninterrupted in-person energy. And the magic of unifieds can kind of do its thing then, right? You have those excellent appointments and you have those surprising walk-ins and you can kind of build up momentum. I also got a lot of compliments on the podcast from a lot of our students who said they listened to the school they were auditioning for right before they auditioned, which was very touching to me, since that was one of the visions for how I thought the podcast could be useful when I was dreaming of it all those many years ago now. It's like 6-7 years ago I really started thinking about this. And by the way, one of our students asked if it was okay to share the podcast with non-MTCA friends, to which of course I say yes. This podcast is intended for all students, whether or not they're privileged enough to be able to have resources to work with a company like MTCA or not, or even if they're foolish enough to use those resources with a different educational company. You are all welcome. Please tell your friends, tell your enemies. We're educating the whole world here. To those of you who are in the middle of your auditions as you listen to this, I'm going to send you all of my love, and if you want it, a little mantra, a little audition mantra. So if you don't want to hear me get cheesy and inspirational, feel free to hit that like 30-second skip button. You might have hit it about twice. I'll bet it's be about a minute mantra. But this, for any of you who maybe are about to walk into an audition, have auditions in the next week, couple weeks, depending as you're listening to this, here is my wish/prayer/mantra for all of you. And feel free to close your eyes if you're the kind of person who would close your eyes and wish this all for yourself as I'm saying it. I wish that you all vulnerably reveal your best and truest, most authentic selves in all of these auditions. I wish for you to share your joy of this art form with these fellow artist strangers. May you have a unique experience that is new, thrilling, and fun. I wish for you to discover something new in each audition, to challenge yourself to release your control of the experience and let it give way to spontaneity, creativity, and new possibilities. I wish for you all to let down your walls of protection a bit more with each audition, to let yourself be seen exactly as you are, naked, with blemishes and all, to be messy and imperfect and open. I wish for you all to be truly present in your auditions, to live moment to moment in your work and in your process, bringing your presentness to bear as an active practice. And lastly, I wish for you all to trust in the work that you did to get to this point. Your work and your play continues, but please trust that you have done what you needed to get yourself where you are here in this moment, and that it was enough. You will be such a great asset to the right program, exactly how you are right now. You are enough. Okay, and please open your eyes if you've been like walking through traffic. I hope you survived the experience. And with that, we'll get to the interview with the great Micheal McElroy from the University of Michigan. Well, we are honored to be joined today by Micheal McElroy of the University of Michigan. Micheal has a BFA from Carnegie Mellon University. He's been on Broadway in tons of shows. I'm just going to name a few, like The Wild Party, Big River, got a Tony nomination for that, Next to Normal, Sunny in the Park with George, etc. He's also a vocal arranger for Broadway, off-Broadway shows. He's the founder of Broadway Inspirational Voices, and he also taught at NYU for many years before becoming the chair of musical theater at the University of Michigan, which we will all remember is located in Ann Arbor, Michigan. They take about 20 to 22 musical theater students. They offer BFAs in MT, dance, acting, and a BTA in theater. Micheal, welcome on the show. How are you feeling today?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
We're so excited. Of course, many of our listeners will listen to our episode with Mark Badama, where we did some of the more kind of granular questions about Michigan. So this is going to get a chance to be a little bit of an update and hopefully a deeper and more kind of qualitative conversation about Michigan as well. Before we dive into that, though, I gave that super brief bio of you, but you've had, this fascinating multi-hyphenate career. I'd love to hear a
Mhm.
little bit about your journey of how you did find yourself here at Michigan.
Well, it really does speak to the fact that connections to people last a lifetime. Um, the previous chair was Vince Cardinal, and Vince put me in my first musical when I was 15 years old
Hmm.
at Shaker Heights High School in Ohio. And I always say this, I was very fortunate to come up at a time where arts education was considered a valued and essential part of educating young people. And so I grew up at a high school where we had a wonderful theater, choral, dance, art department. And my very first musical was in 10th grade, and it was Runaways. And Vince was a student teacher, and he directed me in that and really um, laid the groundwork, the foundation for how I look at what it means to be an artist, work ethic, commitment, accountability, consistency, all of these things that became like the foundation for how you create and do theater.
Mm-hmm.
And also inspired and challenged me to do what I was passionate about. So, I was writing musicals in high school because we were encouraged to do so. You want to do it? Go do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had a real love of theater and music, but didn't really have an idea about what I wanted to do in college. And We used to have these college fairs where actual representatives would come from the different universities. And I just happened to go to one for Carnegie Mellon that day and realized it's 2.5 hours from where I lived,
Mm-hmm.
and decided I took it home. I took the pamphlet because back there was no internet. I took the pamphlet home to my mom, and she said, "Well, let's go on one of the visiting days." And I went on one of the visiting days, fell in love with the program, the campus, and then I went into New York City for the very first time the following year and auditioned there and spent my years at Carnegie Mellon and then moved to New York and started working.
I
So
love it.
that's kind of the short version of how things happened. But it was all because through the formative years of my life, from even elementary school, growing up in a very musical family, but also growing up in a school system that supported the arts, that really laid the foundation for my love and respect for what we do as artists.
And I'd love to hear a little bit about some of the post-collegiate, how you got into vocal arranging, how you got, I mean, obviously, the fantastic acting career, I think we can see, but how'd you get into some of these other, what we call them the multi-hyphens of all the different hyphens
Mhm.
of that, along with actor slash vocal arranger slash teacher slash, how'd you get all
Mhm.
those additional slashes?
Well, I grew up in church. My stepfather was a minister, my grandfather a minister. All my mom, my sister, my brother, my grandmother all played piano, and I played piano as well. So I grew up in this very musical family. But my uncle was also a musical director for musicals, so he would come and stay with us every summer and do local performances. And so he would take me to national touring companies' productions downtown. He would take me to rehearsals of shows he worked on. And so I was surrounded by all of these musicians.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and then, like I said, in high school, I was encouraged by Vince and our other theater director to write.
Uh-huh.
I was always curious about how the things that I was hearing, why I felt something from hearing a song or a choral arrangement in a particular way. And so I was always kind of, as I was training as a piano player, I was also experimenting with, chords and what made you feel something from when you
Mm-hmm.
heard it. And so, but I never looked at writing or arranging as something that I wanted to do. And then in college, I played for musical director at the gospel choir at Carnegie Mellon. And then when I got to New York, I arrived during the height of the AIDS epidemic and wanted to do something for our community that centered healing. And I believed in the healing power of gospel music outside of the religious dogma. And so I brought together 11 Broadway performers to do a benefit for Broadway Cares, Equity Fights AIDS, as an evening of gospel music. And it was people like Alice Ripley, Adrian Lennox, Billy Porter, and it was such a healing space for our community that it became an annual event for Broadway Cares. And through doing that, I had to hone my skills in
Mm-hmm.
arranging and transcribing and all of those things that I did had no I didn't think I would make a living from it. It was just something I did for the choir. And
Mm-hmm.
then from that came, well, we need to arrange some things. We need to write some things. We need, and so I sort of fell into a skill that I had been already cultivating as a child out of the necessity for the choir. And from that, I started to compose and to arrange and continue to do so today.
That's so cool. It's so cool that you sort of the seeds of that enfranchisement. If you sort of lay at the high school, you going, yes, I'm going to say yes to this, and then that enabled
Mhm.
you even later to keep doing that. Let's
Right.
get into Michigan a little bit. So again, we've heard Mark talk a little bit about Michigan too, but I'd ask you some of the same questions because I'd kind of love to hear your perspective on what you think it means to be a University of Michigan student as you've seen it so far. What qualities
Mm.
differentiate them from maybe some other BFA hopefuls as they're entering school.
Well, I've had an interesting background because, like, as you said, I went to Carnegie Mellon, and then I was a part of the faculty that started the new studio on Broadway musical theater program, undergraduate drama at NYU, and now I'm at University of Michigan. So I have a pretty good perspective on each of the
But
programs.
your current partner is always the prettiest, right? That's the rule. It's got to be always.
What I recognize here is that there is a real emphasis put on artists who are critical thinkers,
Hmm.
who are academically and civically minded, community driven, uh, who also want a conservatory style training in musical theater.
Hmm.
And that, of course, as you said, includes dance, acting, and singing, but also have a really robust academic schedule.
Hmm.
So coming here, you have to understand that as robust as the training is, your academics have to be at that place as well.
Yep.
And what I always try to communicate to prospective students, but also to our students here, is that there are a wealth of opportunities here, at University of Michigan as a R1 research facility university. Um, so the temptation is wanting to do it all.
Uh-huh.
And so I'm really trying to communicate to my students that instead of doing the 20 things that you could possibly do, okay, why don't you focus on doing those 5 things really, really well?
Hmm.
And so that's usually the challenge here is that there's such a wealth of opportunities across our university to do any and everything you could possibly think of, uh, that it's really about honing in on centering the training, taking the courses that you need to take, and kind of experimenting with, oh, that interests me, I'll take that,
Yep.
but not trying to do everything,
Yep.
which is hard coming out of a pandemic where for a year and a half you couldn't do anything.
Uh-huh. And what do you what about the specific with the acting, singing, dance training? How do you feel like your students over the course of the 4 years? How are they changed? What skills are they gaining? It's maybe as differentiates them from some other programs. What is Michigan if you're focusing on one of the three disciplines, or where are you maybe training students that may be different than other programs?
Well, we have a strong because we came out of the School of Music. It was at the time the School of Music here, now School of Music, Theater, and Dance. Uh, so there's a real emphasis, specifically in the first 2 years, on some of the musicianship skills,
Hmm.
right? Making sure that you're having sight reading, music theory, piano, musicianship, all of those kinds of skill-based courses that are necessary and will serve you in every aspect of the industry, from auditions to being in new shows and rehearsals. Making sure that our students have those skills. There's also a great emphasis put on the history of our art form and courses that you take in that. And then, in addition, the acting, vocal performance, and dance courses. But really, in those first 2 years, real emphasis is put on skills,
Hmm.
having a really strong musical skill set.
Okay, I'm going to ask you my first of a couple difficult questions now,
Uh-oh.
which is just talking about changes. What changes have you made so far, and or are you thinking about planning to make? Or if there, I know sometimes this stuff takes time. So, are there any little shifts and new directions that the boat is going to start steering in as you sort of move into 2023?
Coming out of the pandemic, we saw first on the macro what was happening in our world because we couldn't escape it. We were all quarantined.
Hmm.
We saw what was happening in our industry. And then on the micro, students were looking at what was happening in their communities within the universities across this country. And so, this idea of what it means to step back into artistic practice, understanding, for me, understanding the importance of diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, and belonging, and how that integrates as opposed to walking side by side.
Hmm.
But how are we integrating those practices, those structures into artistic training? So that's been a passion of mine for a few years. And so when I look at, for example, what our season is, what I really tried to do this year and be really intentional about was celebrating the diverse lived experiences within our student body.
Hmm.
So in choosing our season, that was a focus, right? So we opened in the fall with Sophisticated Ladies, the music of Duke Ellington. We had Mercedes Ellington, Duke Ellington's granddaughter, come here and talk about the history of the show. She was in the original cast on Broadway. Making sure that students are having access to the people that created these art forms.
Hmm.
And then we did Bernardo Alba or Michael John Lacusa, really exploring the Spanish town and flamenco and this all female identifying cast. And then we are doing The Importance of Being Earnest in February, and then we're closing the season with Rent. To really look at, how we're celebrating the population that we have here through the
Hmm.
um, through the selections we make for performances. So that was one. The other was a couple other things that we did starting last year, as I created and helped to develop. It was already in place, but really trying to really structure it more. The affinity group for students of color, and then also creating a students in solidarity group for our students who are not students of color to be able to engage in conversations,
Hmm.
trainings around privilege, fragility, and what it means to stand in allyship, so that we're not putting that work on one population of students, but that all of us are realizing we have work to do, and how can we create a space where that work can be done. And so that was another thing that continues and moves forward now. We just finished our first New Works initiative, New Works Festival. And, it is absolutely essential that artists stepping into the industry know how to work on new material,
Hmm.
because that's a big bulk of the work that you'll do. And so what we did was we got a great two donors that gave us funds, and we brought 5 creative teams. We flew them in, we put them in residence for a week, and every student in our department was cast in one of these shows.
Hmm.
that centered a diverse lived experience and worked with creatives who shared their identity or racial or ethnic identity. Um, and at the end of the week, we shared the material. So the students were getting the opportunity to understand how to connect with creatives, collaborate. What is the actor's responsibility to new work? But also centering it in diverse lived experiences meant that we had to really grapple with a lot of questions around what these rooms would look like.
Mm-hmm.
And on that Sunday, which was 2 weeks ago, it surpassed every hope that I had for our department and for our students and for our community. And another initiative that I started last year that will happen again in March is Community Weekend. And what I do is I bring in 6 BIPOC artists who are leaders in either on Broadway or in their fields to give master classes in things like West African dance, salsa, Broadway styles, Shakespeare to August Wilson, so that our students are being exposed to and connecting with artists in spaces that may challenge them a bit. So once again, everything is through the lens of how are we integrating
Mm-hmm.
diversity, equity, inclusion through a lens of artistic training. And then on top of that, the trainings that we have in DEI. We have a very robust DEI office here in the School of Music, Theater, and Dance. And so there are many trainings offered for faculty, for students that happen all year round. And so making sure that we're connected to that office. Also, and lastly, we wanted to mirror the industry. So we started last year having an intimacy director on any show that had any kind of physical contact, and also a cultural sensitivity coordinator for material that deals with any kind of racial, ethnic, gender identity. So that we're really mirroring what's happening in our industry and preparing our students to be able to use those tools as they move through and matriculate through here, but also into the professional world.
Well, if that was a tough question, boy, was that a great answer. So they're only going to have to get harder.
Mm.
Speaking of difficult, though, is taking over a program that is already so prestigious.
Mhm.
Is that something that you feel like has been a challenge? Like I think sometimes with I talk to a lot of people who are starting new programs or really starting a new direction of a program that's not as well heard of, and they often have lots of room for creativity and full innovation. And here's a big budget and figure it out, right? Do you
Mhm.
feel any kind of resistance, from the sort of the establishment of this university, or just even internally of like, hey, this ship that has been doing really well, and that people have heard of Michigan, and they certainly want to go to the school already. Do you feel any of that sort of like pressure of this as a already well known institution?
Well, what I've tried to do, and academia is its own special space. Uh, so what I've learned, both through trial and error, and also from mentors and supporters who have been in roles of leadership, is that communication, buy-in are essential,
Hmm.
right? So making sure that I'm always in conversation with thought partners here and stakeholders that are integral to the department. Also with staying in communication with my dean, staying in communication with our DEI office, and trying to offer a space of where we can communicate about things. But the buy-in, whenever you're trying to shift something, especially within academia, um, it's a hard turn,
Hmm.
and so it has to be done with care and respect for people's contributions, um, but also a shared vision. Uh, I think what's interesting about this moment is there was such a huge shift post COVID
Hmm.
that we had to step up. But
Hmm.
that's one thing is to step up in a moment of crisis, and the other is to step up and continue that work once things have settled. And I think we see that happening in our industry, this kind of can't we just get back to? But there really isn't a back to, it's only
Hmm.
forward. And so, how are we making sure that these shifts that were created during crisis have deep roots and really become centered in our mission and vision of how we train young artists to step out into the industry, to be prepared for the industry, but also with the tools to be change makers for the industry. So um, to sort of circumvent your question, it really is about buy-in for me. It's about communication and buy-in and making some mistakes and figuring out how to both receive and extend grace in those
Mm.
moments.
Yeah, I mean, that word shared vision is so smart. I mean, in terms of, it seems like that's some of what your job as a leader is to make the vision shared if it's not fully shared, or get on, or help people get on board, or get on board with other people
Yeah.
who are trying to, I mean, so we do in the theater so often, right? We listen to a director and say, what story are we telling? Or we're putting this thing together.
Right.
I'd love to talk a little bit about just the preparation for the kind of launch into the business, what has been showcased, but especially in the past couple of years, as you do more digital preparations and different things of, how are you adjusting, especially someone who is so connected to the industry? What are you bringing to the university of going, how do I prepare my 22-year-olds to actually, so they've already been doing well with getting jobs and stuff, but how am I going to prepare them for what is the business of 2023?
Well, that's a great question. Uh, I'll talk about it from a couple of different perspectives. One is the audition process that we do for our season. We've now made the initial audition part self-tape.
Mm-hmm.
So students now for our season have to do their first audition from home. They get the materials, they self-tape, and then those are submitted. So they have to go through that whole process because it is essential that they know how to do that. Because I do think that our industry, that's not going to go away
Right.
for many reasons. It's here to stay. So I want our students to be facile in that skill.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I've been hearing is you make three. The first one is the practice, the second one is the one, and the third one is just to play. But what I do tell them, that when you get to 5, 6, 7 takes, now you're into the space of diminishing returns. So that's one thing that we're doing. The other is it's always been important to us as a department to continue building bridges to the industry. So we have this thing that the chair curates called Monday Labs. It's the time when the entire department it gets together and we have a guest. That guest is usually someone that can be a casting director, it can be an agent, it can be a manager, it can be a producer, it can be a creative. And so what usually happens is that we fly them in. We have this wonderful organization here called the Friends of Musical Theater, who are very supportive of us. And so they give us the support we need in order to do these things because they value them as well. And we also have another group called Working in the Theater Lab, which a group of parents support. And so we bring in someone, I choose. So what happens is they get here on a Sunday evening. On Monday morning, students have signed up, seniors have signed up for 15-minute meetings. So each senior gets a 15-minute meeting with this guest. They come prepared, asking questions. And then at 4:30, the guest comes into the lab with all of the students and faculty. And 4 students from the senior class have been chosen ahead of time to prepare and share material and get feedback. And so that we're getting our seniors over the course of a semester, over a year, in front of these professionals that they will be seeing
Mm-hmm.
uh, when they get to showcase. And also, it allows us to stay connected to the industry. So, like for example, last year we had Audra McDonald was here. Kristen Chenoweth did a workshop. Andre DeShields was here for the Brent Wagner Speaker Series. We had Christopher Wheeldon here this year, who did a masterclass. And we have Felicia Rashad coming. We have Wilson Cruz coming next week. And then we also have this thing called New Music Mondays that Professor Lynn Shackle curates, where she gets a composer.
Mm-hmm.
And it's usually on Zoom, and some of the students learn the material, and there's a conversation. We had Michael R. Jackson here. And so once again, it's about getting our students connected to the people that they're going to be standing in rooms in front of, and also making sure that their skills for auditioning, for preparing cuts, for communicating with these industry professionals, uh, that they have those skill sets. So we have a real commitment to making sure they're prepared in that way.
I love it. Now, I'm curious. You mentioned a little bit of this from your personal experience. You've taught at two schools that were like standouts, I think, in the musical theater world in terms of their educational focus, in terms of, while they still have rigorous conservatory style elements, but really an emphasis on the liberal arts at both Michigan and NYU compared to other programs like your own. You went to a very conservatory focused Carnegie Mellon, right? Where do you
Mhm.
kind of see the balance and or value of that, for the Michigan students, for your NYU students, and then from your own experience of Carnegie Mellon, where do you see the sort of balance of how much liberal arts is doable and works for you, and how do you feel about the what it brings that they are able to maybe do a minor or even a double major academically?
I think it brings an ability to think critically. It it expands their world, because we're a pretty small department compared to some other programs as compared to NYU. So taking courses outside of the department means their world expands. And as we know, knowing the world in which we live is part of the tool that we need in order to tell the stories we tell. Um, our students are very interested in things outside of the arts. So to have that opportunity to um, use those, academic, muscles to take things that you're interested in, I think is important. I think today's is very different from when I was a student, in that students recognize they need more skill sets.
Hmm.
When you talk about multi-hyphenate and all of those things, that they are much more hungry to have and have been socialized to have, be able to access and have access to many different spaces. Once again, I feel like it's my calling to make sure that they're getting that, which is absolutely important, but that they're fine tuning it so that they're not doing too
Hmm.
much. But I think being a critical thinker is essential. Essential. Being a person who has thinks in an imaginative way, that understands the world in which we live and has a hunger to understand the history of the world in which that is from the past, so that we don't continue to make the same mistakes and do the same things over and over again. And those are the kinds of, besides from the stories we tell, that's the kind of experiences that they're getting across this campus
Hmm.
outside of the department.
I love it. We're going to cue to a short break, run an ad or two, and on the back end, we're going to talk a little bit about the audition and admission process for Michigan. All right, we are back with Michael McElroy, and we're talking a little bit about how to get into the University of Michigan, which so many of our students will ask. I just love to talk about maybe you mentioned the different phases in the course of auditioning for shows when you're in school. Maybe let's start with the kind of pre-screen process. If a
Mhm.
student is submitting a video audition for Michigan, which they're going to start with a pre-screen, what are you sniffing for as you're narrowing down, right? So you got to be narrowing down from a lot to not a lot. What are the things that you're really
Mhm.
looking for that are making that narrowing process happen?
First, I want to say that those videos that they make for the pre-screen are important, and that all of them are watched. I read essays. I mean, so every part of that is important. Don't think that it's something that we're not paying attention to, because we are.
Hmm.
And it's an opportunity to get to know you as an artist, and also to get to know you as a human being. So, when choosing material, make sure you're choosing material that speaks to you, that speaks to your strengths, that allows us to learn about what you're passionate about through the material that you've chosen. I think in this time now, uh, lots of opportunities for students to be given material, but it really has to speak to you. And so choosing songs, monologues that really you're passionate about the composer or the writer, and make sure that that's a part of the selection process. So I think that's important. And so, because as we're looking through them, we're looking at every video that you've created, and we're really looking to see who you are. Also, we're looking to see, is there the talent that you have, but also is there potential,
Hmm.
right? And if you're inspired by the material, then we're going to be inspired by the material that you choose. So that's the first thing. And then from that, we go to the audition in person process. And we really go out of our way to really make sure that students feel comfortable, their parents feel comfortable. We have at the beginning of the morning, we have some students who are in the program come, and I leave the room for 20 minutes and they can talk to the students. Then our students also serve as monitors, hall monitors, so they can talk to parents, they can talk to students. During the course of the audition, uh, I speak to the parents and students. Faculty come in and do a Q&A. So we really want to make sure that they're getting a sense of who we are, what our mission is, our vision is, uh, what we value uh, as an artistic training program within this university. And then in the room, it's about making sure the students feel comfortable so they can do their best work.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to remind them of the joy of sharing what you love to do, and that this should be a joyful experience because you're actually auditioning for schools where you're going to be doing this for 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
So it should be a joyful thing. And trying to get them relaxed enough to really share so that we can get a good sense of who they are. Sometimes we'll ask for another piece of material. Sometimes we'll have a conversation. Sometimes we'll just say thank you because we've seen everything we wanted to see. But always students should know when they leave our room, no matter how the remaining part after they've done their pieces is gone, we would never let someone leave without having seen everything that we want to see.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then when it comes to forming a cohort, it's looking at everything, across the board. So
And how much do you feel like, it's a question I ask a lot of our teachers, there's how much do you feel like fits into that, in the final decision of a yes or no? Is it more likely about the most talented student? Is it, almost if you were to give a numerical value to the most talent you see versus more of that intangible of like, I really want to work with this student. I really like the human being they are, the artist, more of the interview questions, adjustments, the other side of things. How much fits more into the one camp versus the other?
it's really a combination, there has to be talent, but the talent is at different levels. Sometimes you'll get a really amazing dancer who has potential as a singer, but that's what they're coming to get, that training. And I've
Mm-hmm.
seen, young students come in here as dancers first, leave here with real strong vocal technique and skills, and acting skills, to that now are equal to their dance skills that continue to evolve and to get better. So if you can't do all three things, that's not something we go, oh, we don't
Uh-huh.
want you. It really is looking at where the strengths are, the potential is within each of those disciplines. And from our experience in the room with them, I think it's important that there be people that we're like, okay, that's someone who has potential and that we think this will be a good place for them based on the information that we have. I
Mm-hmm.
think too often students get caught up in the place where they're told they're supposed to go because of whatever the reputation is. But every program is not for every student. And so in this process to look at, um, where am I going to thrive? Where am I going to be challenged? What kind of college experience do I want? Do I want campus life or do
Mm-hmm.
I want to be in a city? I mean, all of those things should play into, as well as, is this a large program, smaller program? Am I going to get more one-on-one attention? Is it a conservatory style program or more of a BA? I mean, all of those things need to be considered as opposed to that's the program
Mm-hmm.
that I'm told I'm supposed to be at.
Mm-hmm.
You
And
know,
are
and I
you
always encourage students to think about those questions.
totally? And are you consciously looking for a diversity of skill set? Like, are you specifically looking for, I want some amazing dancers who aren't as strong vocally, and I want some amazing singers who maybe aren't? Or is it just about all the interesting artists that you can find and likely that they will shake out that way? Or is there a consciousness to say, I want some who are stronger in some and some are stronger in other things?
I think it depends on the group of auditioners that year. You know what I mean? But you do want students that are going to challenge each other
Mm-hmm.
in the most positive way, not in a competitive way. But I know that sometimes having someone who's a stronger dancer in the room with me gives me something to work towards, right?
Yes.
So we want a well-rounded, diverse group, diverse levels of, but talent and potential.
Mm-hmm.
right? Have to be there. And then it's about, is this someone that I think I have something to offer to
Mm-hmm.
as a teacher, right? All of those things. Is this a person I'm going to be excited to teach? And do I think I can offer something to them, right?
Yep.
So we try to look at it from all of those different angles.
I know you mentioned this earlier, but both not only with you have your own vocal expertise, but that the Michigan, being within the School of Music at least as it was, and has done more to kind of certainly we've seen over the past has done more to test students musically than some other musical theater schools, right? Maybe exploring their voice more in an audition, maybe interested in more of their musical skill sets. I'd love to know, like, what are you listening for in a student's like musicality or their musical skill set, if there is any kind of test to go, what can they do? What knowledge do they have? What are you sort of exploring in that area?
Well, I mean, there are the obvious things, the pitch, right? Just that's a technical thing of just where are they centered in their pitch, and then I'm looking at, for me, because I come from an acting based musical theater program, I'm looking for, do they have some kind of glimmer or spark of understanding of how storytelling,
Mm-hmm.
of musicality on a line or phrasing, right? Um, are they exploring that the song, though these are cuts, has a beginning, middle, and end? All of the things that will be explored in the training, are there glimmers of it there? Along with the obvious things of, you got to be able to sing in tune, but other things that are they already kind of bubbling there,
Mm.
in terms of the kinds of ways in which we're going to be training them once they get here. And sometimes I'll offer an adjustment, try it this way. And the adjustment will be something really random and seems really kind of, you know, off the beaten path. But then I just want to see, is this student curious? Is
Mm-hmm.
this student open? Or is this the only thing that they know how to do because this is the way they've been coached to do it?
Uh-huh.
Or are they curious enough to be able to go, I can throw that away and just try something really crazy in the moment, right?
I
All
love
those things matter.
I'll ask you probably the only kind of technical or more granular question, just about the pre-screen. You mentioned you read all of the essays. What
Mhm.
about those? There's a couple like optional. They have the optional ballet section. They also can do these video responses where they have to answer questions, right?
Yes.
How does that factor into the admission process?
Well, it's an opportunity for us to get to know them as a human being, right? The material, the songs, the monologues, will show us their skill set and their potential and their talent. But when they do their wild card video, for example, and they do something about a service organization they're involved in, some people do like a cooking thing. We are allowed to see who they are as a human being. And then if they, when they answer one of the questions, and talk about something they're passionate about that's not theater, that allows us to see them as a whole human being, as opposed to just through the lens of the important lens of the art.
Hmm. And would you generally feel like those optional videos are less optional for you? Would you want someone to do it, or if someone doesn't do it, are you like, oh no, that's fine. They just chose not to do that video.
Well, it's all their choice, but whatever they submit, I watch it all. We watch it all.
You mentioned, some of your work in the EDIB world. The head of diversity
Mhm.
initiatives at NYU. I just love to talk a little bit about like how have you seen? You mentioned it sort of coming out of crisis in the sort of COVID George Floyd era. How have you seen that conversation shift? And how have things changed from what you've seen in the collegiate world generally? And then I guess what are the next steps for Michigan, and or do you sort of see for the larger collegiate world and industry? What are those next steps to sort of solidify it beyond just a blip in a crisis?
Um, I think I think that we have to continue to deepen the roots of the work that began during the shutdown for our community, for the theater industry. Here, it's about continually offering opportunities for students to get comfortable with the discomfort that comes from growth. That in some ways is easier to articulate when it comes to artistic practice, though it's still challenging. But when it comes to conversations around race and identity and gender, those are much more complicated questions for us to navigate, but are essential to building a community where all feel that they are seen and can thrive. And so constantly having those uncomfortable
Mm-hmm.
conversations. I try to message from the time that I got here this idea of grace and how we offer each other grace in those moments as we step into uncomfortable conversations. And then how can I continue to support our faculty and students, our community, in gaining the tools to really deepen these initiatives that started a couple years ago? Um, and to start to think that way. Think as you step into your pedagogical practice, your curriculum, your repertoire that you use for your classes, the shows that we choose to for our season, the guests that we bring in to direct and choreograph our shows. All of those things can be intentional spaces where we deepen the diversity, equity, and inclusion work. The community weekend that we do, where I bring in BIPOC artists. All of those things are ways through the art that we are able to continue to keep in the forefront this idea of how representation matters, how a diversity of thought, identity, experience matters, because it challenges us and it expands our way of thinking. I think there's this idea in the theater world that because we're in theater, we're all these open-minded,
Mm-hmm.
you know, uh, liberal human beings, and that's not always the case. We come from all over the country with all these different value systems and have been socialized in different ways and all over the world, so that we continue to create a baseline of understanding, right? So that we're all on the same page around what these things, these ideas, these initiatives mean to us as a community, so that as we move forward, we know how to expand them. We know not only what to do to make sure that they are being implemented, but what do we do when we mess up?
Mm-hmm.
Having a structure in place for healing so that when there is an issue, grace is offered. And also, there's support for a way to move forward and heal the community, and that we don't get stopped or stuck at the point of injury, and that become the last
Mm-hmm.
space that we encounter, because then we never move forward.
It's so beautifully said. I do feel like comfort in the discomfort is good advice for an artist, kind of in all ways.
Hmm.
That like as soon
Yeah,
as you become comfortable, boy, the art it's just hard
yeah,
to keep making art, right? That art is not
but you
often
don't
comfortable.
grow.
Yeah, there's no growth.
Yeah.
I would love to end on just a little bit of advice for the young artist, and we'll maybe say the parents also of this young artist who's listened to this whole
Hmm.
episode. They've heard you say
Yeah.
Michigan is not the only school for them, but they don't believe
Hmm.
you. They're desperate to go to
Hmm.
Michigan. This is their only option. It's the only. They'll never be happy if they don't go to this specific school.
Hmm.
What advice would you have to them for them? It doesn't have to be just about them not getting. It could be about they could get in, but what advice for that student who's just listening at 16, 17 and goes, I want to go blue. That's what I want.
Yeah.
How are they going to make that happen for themselves?
Well, there are a couple things. One, which I say in my talk every week when I see prospective students when they come here to audition, our industry, the audition time frame that you'll be in for the next couple months, just like in our industry, you're going to hear no,
Mm-hmm.
and that we have to get used to hearing the word no and it not being a reflection of our self-worth or our talent as artists, right? And so one of the things I try to message is that no cannot be the scale by which you measure your self-worth,
Mm-hmm.
because then you'll always be dependent on someone giving you a job or getting you into their program for you to feel good about yourself. And this industry, as we know, the journey is not straight; it is up and down.
Mm-hmm.
So getting used to hearing the word no, and also knowing that that is not a reflection of your talent and not a reflection of your worth. That's one thing. For the parents, I always ask them to do their due diligence around financial aid. When your son or daughter, and I'm speaking in binary terms, and I don't want to make sure that your child, and that's even complicated to say because they're teenagers, okay? So when your teenager is auditioning for um, a program in a university or a college, know as much about the financial process before they audition. So know what the federal supports are, know what the scholarship supports are within that institution, because every institution is different,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because once the student auditions and gets accepted, and then the financial aid process starts, and you're surprised,
Mm-hmm.
it's pretty hard to say no to your child then. So I encourage parents to learn. You can reach out to the financial aid offices, the admissions office of the, to find out what is the process.
Mm-hmm.
Here's where we sit financially. What would that look like for my child if they got into this program? So that you are doing the work ahead of time to make sure this is something that you can afford for 4 years
Mm-hmm.
and is not meaning that you take a second mortgage out on your home, right? To really be practical and really pay attention to those things ahead of time. So that's another thing I talk about. I also say, we're not just auditioning the student. The student should be auditioning us. They should be auditioning every program that they go to. How the admissions folks treat you when you come to the audition. How do the monitors treat you? How do the faculty treat you when you come into the room? How do you deal with the accompanist? All of those things are giving you clues about what that experience will be like. So flip the thought process from the fact that we're auditioning you, and flip it in a way that it's giving us shared responsibility in
Mm-hmm.
that, right? And lastly, we have a problem to solve. We need to build a cohort for that incoming class. So every student that comes in the room, we are rooting for you to be the solution to our problem.
Mm-hmm.
So never look at us as the enemy on the other side of the table, but we are always rooting for you to do your best work, because then you help us solve the problem that we have. So those are just a couple of the things that I try to articulate to students and prospective students and to families when they come to our university.
Micheal, you have been an inspiration. This was such a joy to get to chat with you. I really appreciate the time.
Thank you so much.
Well, hey now. I hope you enjoyed listening to the inimitable Micheal McElroy. I could listen to that mellifluous voice for hours, and even better that it is coupled with such wisdom and grace. I will say, for those who didn't catch that Brandon Victor Dixon episode, which was right before this one, I talked a lot about grace, since Brandon had brought it up in the episode, and also partially because I had just recorded this one. And listening back to Micheal, it just struck me as such an appropriate word to celebrate for him, as I think his words and his voice and his essence just ooze grace. In Brandon's episode, I talked a bit about the power of grace as an artist and how you move through the world, and as well as some of these difficult conversations. So feel free to listen back to that. I think it's a great episode in general, but also we talk a little bit about grace, which a word I put on Micheal as one of the greatest compliments you can give to someone. I also think that ties in well with the takeaway I want to do for this week, which is something Micheal talked about. And he certainly wasn't the first to bring up this concept, in that you are auditioning them as much as they are auditioning you, right? Especially this time of year, you'll notice for those seniors who are auditioning in the midst of their big audition season, you're going to kind of be able to tell that a lot of these takeaways will tie into how you can find that quiet confidence, that self-assuredness to walk into the room and be the best artist you can be. Everyone kind of finds their way to that differently, but it is such an essential auditioning skill. So I wish it for all of you. It's the reason actors always audition better when they already have a job, or maybe when they aren't that interested in the job they're auditioning for. They go, man, that audition went really well. It's the reason in this process we often talk about how walk-ins can go so well, because the stakes are low and you're able to walk in as an artist and just work on your craft with these strangers, right? And also in a walk-in, we talk about auditioning them. You are literally auditioning them as much, because you don't know that much about them, right? You might have known where the school is or whatever, but you're sitting there to go, hey, so tell me about you. Well, I've never heard of you program. And the onus is really more on the school to pitch you about the program and, to work with you, talk with you, et cetera, because they're hoping if they want you to actually apply to the school that, you'll have a good experience in the audition, right? But if you can bring this same attitude of like, oh, I'm here to see what happens, right? If you can bring the same attitude into your Michigan audition or whatever audition it is that's like the higher stakes for you, it will serve you so much better for those auditions, right? The way that you can have a genuine conversation with that walk-in school, you want to be just as curious and open to what the experience of a Michigan audition might be as well, as opposed to going, I hope I control it and hope it goes exactly this way, right? If you come in with them already on a pedestal, you actually make it very difficult for them to come down and meet you as a collaborator. And by the way, some of that is okay, right? Some of this is their job too, as they know you're teenagers and that the stakes may be high for you, right? You heard Micheal talking about the ways in which they try to lower the stakes and they really try to make sure you feel comfortable because of course they want to meet your best artist self as well. They don't want to meet your representative or your nervous self or, the person who's in the way of themselves. They want to meet the best artist, the best version of you as possible. But if you can try with all of your might to be an active participant in that process of stakes lowering, right? To actively meet them at the level of a collaborative artist, even though one of the artists, of course, is a little bit younger than the others, right? But if you can participate in that process, you're going to have such a more rewarding experience. We've made the analogy of auditioning and dating a lot, and I think it works well in so many ways. One of the pieces you often get when dating is to try to be more interested than interesting, right? It's another way of saying, you're auditioning them too. Right? This is in the dating world, right? We naturally become more attractive in our curiosity and pursuit of a genuine experience than we do if we're trying to show off and just be amazing. Like, look at me talking about my job and how amazing I am, right? Of course, that's not to say that you're not going to strive for excellence in your work, right? So in the monologues and the songs, of course you want to do the best job possible. But in that surrounding audition experience, I would just give yourself that little note. Can you listen as much as you talk, right? It can be as simple as like, can you notice the way they say, how are you? And then try to respond in kind, right? They may ask a little question at the top. If they ask you a longer, more complicated question, can you really hear it and think about it and get curious about the question as you respond in kind, as opposed to maybe jumping into your pre-rehearsed shtick of like, oh, here's a story I always tell, right? If they give you an adjustment, and this is really hard, can you try to find the bravery to really try that adjustment and genuinely discover what might happen? So be curious about what the result might be, as opposed to just showing off how well you can be adaptable. And we talked about adjustments before. Of course, the goal of change is the goal, but there's that farther step of going, I'm really going to genuinely try it and see what happens, as opposed to, I know how this will work, and sort of already be, showing off the win of the result of what you expect might happen. All of this takes a great deal of confidence, and it is all much easier said than done. But some of those tricks, of kind of focusing on something other than yourself, it can help you take a few steps in that direction, right? So you can feel a little more confident. It can lower the stakes a little bit, right? It's not unlike the old public speaking trick of picturing the audience in their underwear, right? If you're focusing on their vulnerability of, oh, look, they're just like me. They also have underwear, I guess, in that analogy. You're not going to drown as much in your own nerves of, I've got to give this big speech. And now, in this analogy, I do not recommend picturing your auditors in their underwear, but finding that genuine curiosity about what's happening behind the table and what those real human beings are like, it will help you not hyper-focus so much on your own audition anxiety, right? And how am I going to do? And how are my monologues going to go? And how are my songs going to go? It can just help lower the stakes a bit for those high-stakes audition. Well, that's it. Another sterling episode of Mapping the College Audition. Please don't forget to subscribe to us in your podcast platform of choice. Follow us on all the socials media. Links are in the show note for there, as well as just scream about this podcast to your friends. Safely scream for the sake of your voices, but shout about it to your friends how much you love the pod. Please. You can also check us out at mtcollegeauditions.com if you want some individual help for your college audition journey. And if you want to give us a rating and review wherever you're listening, that might be good practice for writing those audition thank you notes and that wonderful follow-up correspondence you hear us talk about. But of course, it's up to your discretion, of course. To my young artists out there mapping their journeys, every time I say the phrase, I'm going to Unifieds, I feel like I'm breaking some unknown rule of grammar. Does anyone else feel this way? We'll see you next week.